So we're talking about Bitcoin, and I'll go into a little bit about 2024. Um, and I'll share a few things about, what I'm personally doing. Yeah. Be- Before I begin, disclaimer, always do your own research. Everything here is just for entertainment, education purposes. It's not a recommendation to trade or anything like that. I have no intention to sell you anything. Um, and people who know me well will realize that I will help you if only if there's a real need to, yeah. Otherwise, I prefer to spend my time on myself. Anyway, we're going to go through a brief intro on metaphysics, specifically the Bazi methodology. Then I'm going to go through a little bit of just one page introduction of Bitcoin to people who are really, really new about what Bitcoin is. Then I'm going to go into the astrology of Bitcoin, and this is my interpretation. And then I'm going to go into the risk of 2024, yeah, and beyond. Okay. Now, before I jump in, because this recording might go to people who have no clue who I am, just so you know the limits of my knowledge, a little bit of my background. I graduated as a computer science with a computer science degree. Then I spent 2.5 years in a top US consulting firm, doing a lot of different industries, explaining to C-suite people what they should be doing. Then I spent 13 years in investment banking doing research. I peaked as the top analyst for small caps across the whole of Asia. There was a ranking by fund managers across all 3 continents. And then I quit a year later. Okay. Why? It was a bit of burnout, but mostly jaded by the world of money and finance. So I sent a goodbye email to all my clients around the world with a brief warning about what I saw in the markets. And then I left for India to do the eat, drink, and pray thing. A year later, well, we saw the global financial crisis. Anyway, I went on to learn astrology, Indian, Vedic, Western, and spend most of my time learning and now practicing Chinese methods. I also took up things, energy healing techniques, meditation, Reiki, quantum healing, QHD, and I got certified as a hypnotherapist, and I practiced as a hypnotherapist, helping people for a while as well. So you could say I have a foot in technology, a foot in finance, a foot in metaphysics, and an arm and a leg in all things spiritual. I consider myself an odd person with an eclectic collection of toolkits, which kind of helps me explore and understand the world in many different ways. Yeah. So with that out of the way, let me just go into metaphysics. Now, metaphysics, those who know, bear with me. Those who are not so familiar, just listen, and if you want more, you can go online and search for any of these topics. So in metaphysics, you have 3 things which come together to allow you to create an outcome. There are a lot of things which focus on timing, which is what we'll focus on. There are things which focus on understanding the space, the location, which is feng shui. There are a lot of things which actually are mostly focused on the self, the person itself. All right. Now, I'm going to focus today primarily on Bazi, which is timing based. So heaven is astrology based. So Bazi here. Now, in a Bazi chart, Bazi translated from Chinese to English means 8 characters. So 8 characters, what does it mean? It means the year, month, day, and hour, and looking at the top 4 characters and the bottom 4 characters. So the year, is what most people will focus on. Like this year we call the wood dragon year. So the year has 2 characters, the top and the bottom. The top is called the heavenly stems, okay? And the bottom is called the earthly branches. Yeah, so 4 on 4, 8 characters. Then we have the hidden stems, which I will not be talking about. That goes into a little bit more detail. Now, in addition to these 8 characters, we also look at the 10-year pillars. Now, in this system, we believe that this chart, which is this specific entity, goes through different environments and it changes every 10 years. So in this particular instance, I'm just taking a snapshot of it. Goes through at year 3, year 13, year 23, year 33. Some people will find that theirs go through, year 10, year 20, year 30, so on and so forth. But it basically starts counting at a specific year, and then it just adds 10 to go to the next pillar, yeah? And each pillar is identified by a stem, a heavenly stem, and an earthly branch as well, right? So the combination is pretty vast. Now, in order to understand this, what are the heavenly stems? There are 5 elements in Chinese metaphysics: water, wood, fire, earth, metal. And each of these elements have a yin and a yang component. All right? I'm going to keep the chat open, so in case anyone, has an urgent need or suddenly I go soft, just pipe in. Yeah. So the 5 elements, each have yin and yang. 2 times 5 gives you 10. So there are 10 possible heavenly stems. If we're looking at the earthly branches, there are actually 12. Normally, people look at it as the animal signs. But if you understand metaphysics, then you actually look at these 12 as 4 seasons, each season divided into 3 phases: the rising, the decline, and the transition. Okay, and the transition is always an earth element. Okay, so in winter we have the pig, followed by the rat, followed by the ox, which transitions then into the tiger, etc., etc. So it's actually the 4 seasons with 3 sub-phases within each season. So that's the 12. Okay. Now, in order to analyze, we need to understand what happens when certain elements appear together in a chart or in a formation. Okay. So there are 3-way combinations and 2-way combinations. Let me just take you through the 3-way combination. The 3-way combination that we're going to use most this afternoon is the water frame. Now, the water frame is when you see the monkey, the dragon, and the rat. Okay, so you see the rat here, the monkey, and the dragon. When you see these 3, what it tells you is that the water frame is created and the water element is particularly strong. Now, if you're thinking, so what does it mean and all that, that comes later. I'm just telling you that white plus red gives you pink. Okay. Now, what does pink mean? How do you use it? Comes later. So anyway, you see these 3, you see water element becomes strong. Now, the other elements, just for completeness, there's the metal frame, the fire frame, and the wood frame. Okay, we won't use those, but that's just for your information. The 2-way combinations, I'm just going to do 2. There's the heavenly stem and the earthly branch combination. So when you see one element in the heavenly stem, like the Jia wood, with the yin earth, it will form an outcome of earth. Okay. Now, these are the 2 to focus on. The yang fire with the yin metal, when they come together, the potential outcome is water. I say potential because it needs other things to actually come into place for the water to actually come out. Okay, there's the yang earth and the yin fire. A yin water. Together, you will actually get a fire combination. Okay, and in the earthly branches, these are the 2 to pay attention to, just for this afternoon. The dragon with the rooster will give you metal. The snake and the monkey will give you water. If you can't remember, don't worry. I will come back to this. Now, let's touch on Bitcoin, okay? Those are the basics on metaphysics that we will need. Let's come to Bitcoin. Before I jump in, a little bit of my experience. My first time hearing about Bitcoin was sometime in 2013. And I had a condo in Bangkok, and someone was actually helping me manage it. And one fine day in 2013, when I went there, he was very, very excited. He was telling me, "Hey, have you heard about this digital currency, blah, 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 blah." And I mean, me being an arrogant intellectual, I just listened to him, nodded my head and thought it was just one of those fly-by-night assets. I KIV'd it thinking I'll come back to it, but I never did. The second time I came into contact, I mean, too bad for me, right? 2013. If only I did, right? But anyway, the second time I came into contact was actually during COVID. And I think COVID has a lot of negative things that happen, bad things that happen to a lot of people. But I like to look at the good side, and it allowed me to, it forced me really to actually sit down and learn a lot of things which I would never have listened and learned. And one of those things was crypto. And after learning a little bit, I jumped in with pretty much 2 feet. Now, why did I jump in? It wasn't because I understood everything and anything about Bitcoin at that time. It was very, very simple. I looked at it as a new asset class, an interesting asset class. I did understand a little bit. It was an interesting asset class, but two important things was happening. One, a lot of very smart technologists were actually jumping in. And two, a lot of smart plus financially savvy and rich people were jumping. Now, when you get tech, when you get intelligence, when you get money coming together, you just close your eyes and you jump in. And the rest is history. At my peak, I think my portfolio went up 7x. Of course, like many, I lost most of it when it came all the way down. Okay, so that's my brief history with Bitcoin and crypto in general. Now let's jump in. For those who understand Bitcoin completely and thoroughly, bear with me. I'm just going to do a very, very simplified, possibly oversimplified explanation. Now, what is Bitcoin? For those who are not so familiar, Bitcoin as a technology is a technology which allows you to own an asset and then transfer this asset from your own wallet to another wallet, potentially halfway across the world. It doesn't require any person, any entity in between to actually assist in this transaction. Okay. Now, how does it actually work? It requires something, obviously, it requires a mechanism. And a mechanism is a system of computers, which we call miners, which are working very hard to actually collaborate and share and continuously maintain the integrity of all these transactions. So this system is keeping track of which wallet holds what. Okay, so that's a nutshell what it is. Now, why are they called miners? Well, essentially, each of these computers are competing, using a lot of energy, using their computational power to try and fight for the next block. And this block is worth money, obviously. Okay, in Bitcoin, each block is produced approximately every 10 minutes. So it's a mix of computational power plus luck, that you actually are the one who actually wins or gains that particular block. So they're actually mining for it. And if you're lucky, you get a gold nugget, etc. Yeah. So that's why it's called Bitcoin mining. So that's out of the way. Now, when was Bitcoin born? Okay. The Genesis block or block 0 was created on this day, 3rd of January 2009. And the timing is time-stamped there, 1815, 615. So that is the birth time that I'm using for this analysis because it is stamped. Where, I don't know, it's on the internet, okay? Interestingly, just a fun fact, on the 3rd of January, this was the headline, Chancellor on brink, blah, blah, blah. And whoever programmed Bitcoin actually embedded this into the Bitcoin code itself on 1616 line. Okay, if you look at the translation in reverse, it reads exactly as what this headline reads. So if you look at this and you understand what Bitcoin was, then it is very, very clear that the person whose name is called Satoshi Nakamoto, no one actually knows who he really is. His whole idea behind creating Bitcoin was to be able to allow transactions to occur without intermediaries, in this case, without a central bank coming in between, etc., without the need of banks. Okay, so that is actually the core concept of why this exists. Now, if you translate the birth time, okay, of Bitcoin, you will get these 8 characters. This would be the 八字 of Bitcoin. Now, a lot of people, when they tell you, oh, you are so and so. So in this case, people will say, oh, they were born, Bitcoin was born in the Earth Rat, okay, year 2009. What is the Earth Rat? The Earth Rat, to give you a symbol, is actually a mountain in mist, because rat is water, kind of like mist water. So it's kind of a mountain in the middle of the mist. But what is the true inner character of Bitcoin? We always look at the day, okay? The day is the unique identifier, okay? The Chinese metaphysicians will call it the day master, but this is the identifier, okay, which is Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is actually a mountain with metal underneath. So if you have a mountain with metal underneath, what are you? You are actually a mineral mountain. A mineral mountain with metal underneath, which is just waiting to be mined. Get it? Yeah. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, sorry. So anyway, let's move on. Okay. When I look at Bitcoin, the first thing I look at is who it is, which is, in this case, Bitcoin is a mineral mountain, okay? And I look at the whole chart, okay? When I look at the whole chart, you'll notice the elemental balance. You have 2 earths, 1 wood, 2 water, 3 metal. There's one element that's completely missing, and that is fire. And in Chinese astrology, the 2 elements which are very, very important to allow harmony in life is actually water and fire. So water is definitely there, but fire is absent. So without fire, there is actually a disharmony in this chart. On the other hand, when fire comes in, that's when this chart becomes very harmonious. So remember that fire coming in will allow this chart to warm up. This is a mineral mountain born in the middle of winter. So the whole chart without fire is very, very cold. That's why when fire comes in, it warms up the chart, it creates harmony. So we need fire to come in for this chart to be harmonious. For Bitcoin as a whole, the structure to become more interesting, more valuable. Yeah, so that's important. The second thing to note is this is a mineral mountain. The hour is actually what you produce, okay, what you do, your work. And what is the hour? The hour so happens to be pure metal. So the metal that's underneath this mountain is actually being mined and producing directly into a pure metal hour. So bear that in mind, metal is the resonance for the output of the Bitcoin structure, okay? Now, once I understand this makes what to look for, I usually go on to look at this ancient classic. Okay, loosely translated is the all-knowing precious mirror. Yeah, and it's got 29,000 Chinese characters split into 11 chapters and so forth. A couple of fun facts. One, if you read it, it will tell you about scholars, about generals, and if you cannot be a scholar or general or magistrate, you're considered useless, etc. And then they can get very, very extreme, and some of the writing says, if you see this person will die, It's pretty dramatic. The second fun fact is that, this guy, was obviously very passionate, started writing, and at the beginning, each combination, they had a lot of words and chapters and lines and phrases dedicated to it. But by the time it came to the last few, he basically probably got very tired, and a lot of it is very, very short. Okay, so when you come to the final characters, chapters, it was all very, very short. Okay. Now, what does it say about this chart? It focuses on the day and the season or the month in which you're in. In this case, we're talking about the Earth. Okay, Bitcoin is Earth, born in the month of the Rat. So obviously it's very cold. This particular book explains that in the 11 and 12 month, very cold, with this kind of chart formation, fire is the most needed, and not just any fire, yang fire. Yang fire is the sun. Okay, the sun is needed to warm the chart. Okay. Okay, and the next element that's needed is wood. Okay. Sorry, someone is not muted. Sorry. Okay. Please mute yourself. Sorry. Now, so when you see the yang fire coming in, it will actually bring harmony to the chart. Yeah. So you want yang fire and you want yang wood. Now, going back to the chart, we already have yang wood, right? Now, this is yang wood. Bitcoin already has yang wood in a month. So that's fine. So now what happens? If you look at the 10-year pillars from 2019, the yang fire came into the chart. The environment warms up. The 10-year pillar is your environment. And your environment warms up. It warms up your chart. Bitcoin's chart. Okay? So with these two elements, what you can say is that this is the chart that brings light to the entire warmth, to the entire picture. And if you look at the price chart of Bitcoin, you will see this. You split it. This is the pillar when it was actually in the previous 10-year pillar. And what happened when it entered the fire tiger, when the yang fire appeared? Pretty nice, yeah? So we are now halfway through this pillar. So not over yet. Story is not over yet. Next, if you translate that chart into annual performances, now the percentage is slightly different from those academics who have actually looked at the annual. Okay, why? Because I'm using the first week of February transition to calculate the actual solar year. Yeah. So like the wood dragon year this year began actually only on the 4th, first week of February. Yeah. So the transition. So you'll find a pattern here. People call it, those who are familiar with Bitcoin, call it the 4-year cycle. So you have good, 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 bad, good, 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 bad, good, good, a little good, bad. So now it's good, and then now we are in a good year. Now notice one interesting thing. This was cut off in 2013. How did Bitcoin do? It was crazy. Bitcoin went up 3,839%. 3,839%, 38 times. So if you had 30,000 you going into it, you would be a millionaire in 1 year. Okay. Now, what's so special? What's so special about water snake? Look, I told you about the two-way combinations. Earth combines with yin water. Monkey combines with snake. So I cover everything. You see, these are the combinations. And yin water on snake just so happens to be a perfect combination. Notice? Notice? So yin water snake is, in our lingo, a heaven and earth combination. And in our analysis, most of the time, not all, but most of the time, when you see something on the outside which does a heaven and earth combination with your own pillar, amazing things happen. Okay. Specifically, what amazing thing happens requires you to understand, the basic toolkits, what is water, what is fire, etc. But amazing thing happens. And obviously, in 2013, something pretty amazing happened for Bitcoin. Yeah. So that's just a fun fact. Now, the other thing to note, when the fire comes in, to your chart, what does it do? There is actually a combination, a water combination. Now, I said earlier, it is a potential combination. It requires the environment to allow the transformation to actually happen. Okay. Now, what is water? This requires a little bit more understanding. Bitcoin is Earth. So to Earth, to Bitcoin, metal elements are what you produce. Perfect, the hour is actually a pure earth metal pillar. Yeah, I already said that. So Bitcoin is Earth, produces metal. Now, what is water? Water is produced by metal, okay, which is translated, it is the value of what you actually do. So for human beings, when we go out and work, when we get paid, the value of what our work is our reward, our wealth, our salary. So in lingo, in metaphysics, barter lingo, the water element is the wealth element of Earth. So Bitcoin's wealth element is actually water, or really the reward or the value of what Bitcoin actually does. So the value of what it does potentially comes out when the Yang fire appears. Yeah. So what are the conditions required? The condition that is required for actually the water to actually come out of this combination, i.e. for the value of what Bitcoin produces to be actually more visible, is that you have supportive elements to actually allow water to come out, which is metal and water. What happens in 2024? In 2024, when the dragon comes in, you get the dragon, rat, and monkey. Remember the three-way combination? This is the water frame. It is a very powerful combination that allows water elements to be particularly strong. In addition, the dragon combines with a rooster to produce a metal combination. Okay. So if you put it all together, when Bazi practitioners look at the chart and start seeing all this, they're like, oh my God, something is happening. Now, a brief look will tell you definitely something is happening. Now, the question of whether it's good or bad, that is the art of deciphering. And in this particular instance, because we know, based on the Chinese classics, based on the configuring of the chart, that the sun warms up the charts and creates harmony, allows water to be seen. Now, not only that, remember when I told you that the year is actually a mountain in mist? Now, a mountain in mist is what people see when you can't see into it. Now, what happens when the sun comes up? The mist clears. When the mist clears, you are actually able to see more of the actual mountain behind it. Okay, so that's the other layer of understanding, a Bartle chart using pictures. When the sun comes up, the mist clears. The external facade of a mysterious entity, kind of there, kind of not there, a mountain in mist, clears up and you say, oh, this is actually a mountain. And then when the dragon year comes, the water frame comes, whoa, the water structure actually forms and people start seeing this metal and the metal starts being appreciated and visible to more people. Okay, so this is why I'm particularly excited when I see all these things and I notice a lot of the other fundamental structural changes in Bitcoin in 2024. Now, I kind of just did this for fun. My monthly assessment, I looked at all the combinations and I said, for the next 12 months, what are the good months and what are the not so good months? Because within any good year, there's always going to be bad, all right, or dangerous or uncertain. So the yellow ones are just my personal view. Those of you who are very good can take a stab at figuring it out. I would say that April will be the 2 months, or February is past. So April will be the next month, which will be particularly good. June and October will be the problematic months for Bitcoin this year. Yeah. Now, I also did another counter check. I checked the daily performance based on the day pillar of Bitcoin for the last 10 years. So you'll find that on average, these are average percentage performances. On average, the best pillar in terms of the stem is actually the Yang fire. Are you surprised? No, by now you must remember Yang fire good. Okay, so Yang fire on average gave you a 0.6% improvement. Yeah, and the average for all the other, doesn't matter what animal sign or what branch it is, was always positive. If you talk about the branch, it somehow likes dragon and it somehow likes goat. Okay, and in the combination wise, the three best stem branch combinations is wood dragon, fire dog, fire rat. So the worst are the three red ones. So what is this here? Wood dragon. So this kind of gives me comfort that we are not too far off in our analysis using a quantitative measure. Okay, so just always good to check. You don't jump into conclusions. You let the data tell you and confirm and affirm for you. I always like to do that. Okay. So in summary, Bitcoin is a mineral mountain. It produces pure metal. We are now in the best 10-year pillar with the Yang fire appearing. It is a transformative year this particular year in 2024, the dragon year. Okay. We have a water combo from the 10-year pillar and the water structure and the metal combination. And we are able, it's always nice to affirm that what we are seeing is not made up. Okay. So that ends the part on Bitcoin. And let me move on to 2024. I'll share a little bit about astrology. I've heard and listened to other talks, but for some strange reason, I haven't heard some of the aspects that I'm about to share with you, okay, on 2024 and the astrology of 2024. Maybe the really serious practitioners only tell this to their closest followers. So I don't know. So let me just share with you my take on 2024. Okay. Simple overview. 2024 is the start of a new 20-year cycle. Okay. Each 20-year cycle is depicted by a particular element. Okay. And 2024 to 2043 is period 9. In period 9, the resonance is south. The element is fire. We're talking about illumination, joy, warmth. So in this era, we're talking about things like education, things which inspire, and all these things are the industries or the activities which will do well, okay, which will be supported. If you look at the period that has passed, it was period 8. Period 8, which is the year from 2004 to 2023, the element northeast is earth, okay? And period 8 is all about wealth, about hard assets. Surprise? No, shouldn't be, because the last 20 years have been about this, okay? 2024, the birth year of 2024, my technique, I generally follow this technique, which is the first hour of spring, okay? And the first hour of spring, this is the first hour of spring for the wood dragon year. Now, in the wood dragon year, what you see is, yes, people can analyze the yang wood and the dragon and tell you a lot of things about that. But in its internals, what is the identifier? What is the reference point that I typically use is actually an earth dog, a pure earth pillar. If we're talking about just the year, most people say, well, the wood dragon year is the image of a beautiful green mountain, yeah, because it's the earth with trees below. It's great for academic pursuits and all that, great, okay? You will see that the elements-wise, you're talking about water absent, completely absent. That means that there's wisdom lacking, not flowing very well. Wood is present, but very weak. Wood is about growth, so growth is actually very weak. Earth is strong because you got a pure earth pillar in the day, right? And you have got, it's a dragon year, so earth there as well. But there's a problem. And here is the thing which I want to explain to you. If we look at the year is a wood dragon. If we're talking about a day, it's an earth dog. In Chinese metaphysics, this is called a heaven and earth clash. What is a heaven and earth clash? If you go back to the chart of the structure, you use this as a reference point, the day as a reference point, earth. What controls earth is wood. So yang wood controls you. And when you have a dog and a dragon, it is a clash of two mountains. Whenever you see a heaven and earth clash anywhere, it simply means massive turmoil. Usually not good, okay? Unless you're someone who is actually a vulture, you scavenge. So fine, you can pick up the pieces when the two mountains have clashed. Okay, in this particular case, it's a two mountain clash. Probably climatic. Okay, so two forces clashing. Just for reference, if you go back through the centuries, the last time this happened was in 1939. Does anyone know what happened in 1939 that could have been considered a really, really bad thing? Okay, I'll save you time going through Google. That was World War II. 1st September 1939, Germany, World War II began. Okay, so not particularly good. Okay, now heaven and earth clashes don't happen often. So when it happens, you have to pay a lot of attention. Now, where would I guess the problem is? 5 yellow is in the west, so I would say in the west. Now, for those who are familiar with Barca and all that, the immediate question is, so what about 1939? Where was 5 yellow? Wrong question. Why is that a wrong question? Because in 1939, that was a period 4. Okay? And in period 4, 5 yellow is actually an auspicious star. So in 1939, what stars should you look at? You should look at 4 and 9. Sorry, you should be looking at the other stars which are not so good. Okay, and in that case, in that year, the stars which are not so good are also in the west. Okay, just in case you are trying to, do your own analysis, be very careful. Don't always assume that 5 yellow is bad all the time. It is dangerous, but not in 1939. Okay, now when? My best guess is third quarter. Why? Usually, if I want to look at the timing within a year, I will split it into quarters, looking at year, month, day, hour. So because the problem begins with the day clash, clash by the year. So I'm assuming, and this is an assumption, that it happens in the middle of the year, probably beginning more clearly in third quarter. Now, already showed you that there's a heaven and earth clash in the year into the day. There's one other problem. If you look at the hour, the monkey and the tiger as a wood metal clash, usually talking about accidents and injuries. Okay, but on a global scale, when you're talking about year, it is not pretty. And fire controls metal, so this is also another heaven and earth clash. So it's not one heaven and earth clash. It is two heaven and earth clashes. Let me say that in a chart reading, it doesn't get worse than this. All right? So this understanding is why I didn't put all my money into Bitcoin this year. Because I'm really, really concerned that something is going to happen. Probably in the second half. And I'll summarize everything at the end of this presentation. So just bear in mind, the chart formations that you see for 2024 is probably as bad as it gets. The other reading or essence to note is that you have a pure earth in the day and a pure metal on metal in the hour. Earth produces metal, so this metal here in the second half is very strong. You consider the year and the month, it is not as pure. Okay, so these two pillars in the second half, the identity, the elemental strength is much stronger than the first half, meaning the impact, when the metal comes out is going to be a lot stronger, and a lot more impactful in the fourth quarter. Okay, so when you transition the middle of this year, you have to actually watch and be careful. Okay, be careful this year. I also look at the annual charts or versus the natal charts of the countries, and I'll just give you a brief. I wrote most of this 2 years ago, and I've never done a talk for anyone. So I've just filed it away. So I'm copy and pasting what I wrote a couple of years ago, and edited it for simpler reading. Yeah. So in the US since 2022, it's forced to learn discipline, uncomfortable, and this year you're talking about self-created problems due to arrogance. Take it as it is. In China, it will start warming up, and in the second half, it becomes more useful. China. So 2024 is when things start warming up for China. Yeah. In Singapore, since I'm in Singapore right now, and a lot of my students are in Singapore, the elements will wane by the third quarter. It will be good and then bad after mid-year. Okay, you're talking about energy being drained, neighbors back into the corner. And for those who are interested, I did a fun check of Israel just to figure out what things are going on. And I'm not going to say good or bad. I'm just going to tell you that for Israel's chart, there is actually a heaven and earth clash in 2025, next year. So I've already explained what heaven and earth clash is. You go figure out what it means for Israel. So Israel's heaven and earth clash is in 2025. Okay, not this year. Now, the problems are in the West. So let me just share with you some of the charts which I'm looking at in the US. Yeah. This is a chart that a lot of people are familiar with, but this is extracted from their own budget office, the US budget office, and they project it. So a lot of people will tell you, wow, the US is borrowing a lot of money, but do you know what's going on? According to their own projections, it's going to go through the roof. It's already past 100% of GDP. Their federal debt, the government debt, is past 100% of GDP since a couple of years ago, and it's actually going all the way to over 170%, as far as the eye can see. And if you look at the underlying assumptions, I can tell you the underlying assumptions are very too optimistic. Okay, too optimistic. So it's going to be worse. Okay. Is this going to be allowed to happen? I mean, a lot of people say this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And then the people who are saying, no problem, no problem, they will tell you, oh, look at Japan. Japan is at 260, actually 200 over already. 260% of that to GDP. No problem. Japan's stock market is at all-time highs. So, correct. That in and of itself is not an issue, as long as you can fund it. And everyone believes you can fund it. Okay, so it's a confidence game. Yeah, you can go and borrow money from a bank. You borrow $100, $1 million, $1 billion, doesn't matter as long as the bank believes you can pay. As long as other people believe you can pay. Okay. So what is interesting is that a lot of people don't look at this particular item, which I believe is more important, or at least quite important. It's called the Net International Investment Position, NNIP. So let me explain. If you look at a country, you have the country borrowing money. When the country, say, US borrows money from, say, Japan, okay, what happened to this item is that there's a record that is kept, and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, actually collates all this to produce a lot of statistics. So when you borrow from, US borrows from Japan, what will happen is it will actually have a minus sign on US assets and then a plus sign on Japan's assets. Yeah. So if you actually buy things from Japan, US buys things from Japan, you will actually have a minus sign because you're buying, and then Japan will have a plus because you sold, and so on and so forth. If Japanese investors actually invest and buy your land, your properties, your assets in the US will actually have a minus and Japan will have a plus. So it's kind of the balance sheet of a nation relative to other balance sheets. So this is important. Okay. Now, who actually has a net positive? Because why is it important? Because if something is not doing well in your country, if you have a lot of assets overseas, in other countries, the returns, the interest income, the investment returns, the profits, worst case, you have to sell, you can still sell your overseas assets to fund your own balance sheet, yeah? So it's kind of an international way of looking at entity balance sheets. If you look around the world, who are the ones with the biggest balance sheet? That is why Japan has no problem for now. For now, because Japan is the largest creditor to the rest of the world. It's NIP. NIP is number one, followed by Germany. Now, in theory, you have China and China Hong Kong. So if you add the two together, China is even stronger. So those people who are saying, wow, China has a problem with that and that and that and that. Look, guys, if all the debt is in your own country, the government can come in and basically, mandate certain things, and you play, games or musical chairs, and you say, okay, now you lend to this, now you lend it, now you take this loss haircut and all that. So if it's all internal, it's fine. But when it becomes international, that's the issue. Okay. Now, so China has huge amounts of overseas assets, not just in treasury bonds. Yeah, it's got investments in property, land, and you're not talking about a government. You're talking about a country. Chinese companies, Chinese individuals also own a lot of assets abroad. So it has a very, very powerful external position. Fun fact, Singapore, for some reason, actually appears in the top 10. Who are the ones on the other end of the spectrum? Because for every asset, there's a liability. So if these countries have a lot of assets, there must be another bunch of countries with a lot of liabilities, right? So the top 10 worst, Greece is number 10, the worst or the most deficit. Ta-da! The United States. The United States has 16 trillion. I mean, it's not funny, yeah? I mean, the next number is actually 1 trillion. And then that's Spain. That's bad enough, less than 1 trillion. And the United States is like negative 16 trillion. So this is why when you have a huge external debt issue or debt issue, and you are already a huge deficit against the rest of the world, it becomes a problem when countries around the world lose confidence in you. Okay. Again, remember, the ability to borrow more and more is always a confidence game. So when will this confidence crack? Because you know it's not sustainable with these kinds of numbers. To give you a perspective, for the US, everything was pretty okay until 2007. Notice how the chart collapses. What happened in 2007? I think everyone knows. Global financial crisis. Why did this happen? This is my theory. My theory is that in 2007, when the banking system was entering crisis, a lot of the people who had money, a lot of the companies who had money started leaving, moving their assets elsewhere. And that's why you had this exodus, which created a huge deficit. This is my theory. Okay. So if there's an outflow, they need another inflow to plug the gap. Who came in to help? That's the question. Who came in to help? Because in 2007 to 2008 to 2009, America was in crisis. It definitely needed other countries to help, especially when you have this exodus, huge exodus. Now, we don't know the entire, but we can look at it as a proxy. Who bought up the US Treasury bonds? 2007 to 2008. Suddenly the curve steepened. Okay, this is the foreigners who came in to actually buy US debt. Which are the two largest components? A little bit difficult to read, but you can tell the two largest are Japan and China. But let me give you a simpler table. Between 2006 and 2006 to end 2008, the 2 years of the global financial crisis, a total increase of 974 billion increase in borrowings from foreigners just on treasury. The biggest lender, China. China was 1/3. Then you had the Caribbean banking centers, loosely translated, there are the Cayman Islands and so forth. Then you had the oil exporters. Everyone else is small. China, without China coming in to help the US during and after the global financial crisis, US would have been in deeper shit. Okay. How do I know? The numbers don't lie. Now, if, touch wood, if the US actually entered a crisis this year, next year, what do you think? Which countries will come in to help? Do you think China will come in to help? I don't think China would. Especially given the situation right now, with the tense situation right now between the two countries. I really don't think so. So who else can help? Actually, no one that I can see. And that's the problem when I don't see any obvious country coming to help. Because Germany can't. Germany is also in trouble. Even though Germany has a lot of, external assets, as you can see in the top 10 table, Germany's country is actually in trouble. As a country is in trouble as well. Yeah. So this is the first question mark. If the US got into trouble, who is going to come and help? Not China, who came in and helped during the last crisis. Now in the US, is some crisis brewing. If you look at the total assets, bank failures, okay, by assets, you'll find that it actually went up again. The largest ever was Washington Mutual to 2008, GFC. And the second and third largest happened last year. And we just had another bank go into problems, a few days ago. Okay. Now with these two banks, when this went under, there was a risk that the entire system was going to be taken down. So what happened is the Federal Reserve, the US proxy central bank, Federal Reserve, came in and came up with a new rule, BTFP. Basically, it allowed the banks with a lot of assets which are not quite liquid to pledge it and actually get cash from the central bank, the Federal Reserve, to actually pay off the deposits, etc., etc. So a liquidity fix. So the Federal Reserve came out with that plan. Now, what's the problem? Well, that plan expires in 2 days' time. Okay. Now, what is the cause of all this issue at this moment? Number one is inflation causing interest rates to go up. You can use carrot and stick or whatever, but essentially interest rates went up. Now, what is the direct result for those people? This is for those people who are not so familiar with finance. Okay. So bear with me, those people who are very good in finance. When interest rates go up, the value of bonds go down. Now, if you have a 30-year treasury bond, just for example, and you just kept it with you, you did nothing, you kept it with you. From 2019 to 2020, you would actually have experienced a 24% gain in your value. You did nothing. Just because interest rates go down and because you value bonds or yielding any kind of instruments that yield, you value it with interest rates. Interest rate go down, the value goes up. The reverse is also true. And the worst was actually in 2022. because 30-year bond yields went from 1.9 to about 4. So for every dollar, if you just kept it with you, about half of it is gone. It did nothing. And this is treasury bonds, okay, the safest asset in the US. 30-year treasury bonds, you did nothing, 45% wiped out. That's the problem. Now, banks are geared instruments. So if you look at the total assets in the US commercial banks, about 23 trillion, okay, it's backed by equity of 2 trillion. So if a 10% move in the value of asset will wipe out your equity. This is a 10x multiplier. People will say, hey, it's not too bad, because if you go back into history, during 2007, 2008, when the crisis actually happened and all that, the leverage ratio, asset equity ratio, was actually 20x. Okay. So this is fine. It should be fine. It's okay. You got cushion. But really, okay, because what is embedded here doesn't show you what is called unrealized losses. What do I mean? It means that the balance sheets that are produced and easily accessible do not write off what I just showed you just now. The write-off that you should do if you mark to market the actual market value of all your US Treasury bonds. It is embedded here. You should actually minus a bit more to get to your real net tangible assets. But banks don't have to do that. And trust me, there's no incentive for the Federal Reserve to actually force banks to do it, because you're just going to be asking for trouble. To give you some idea, the net unrealized gains and losses was terrible in 2008, 2009. This is securities, yeah? And collapse even further. Interesting, it is discontinued from last year. Interesting that if you look for this data series, is discontinued for all the series, okay, except for one. Okay, but this is only for securities, mark-to-market securities. So they don't want to make it, for some reason, they are not interested in this data anymore. So it's not easy for you to actually find it. Still can. There's a guy who actually produced a paper published earlier this year, 18th of February. He did it on a bank-by-bank basis. And his number is 1.5 trillion in unrealized mark-to-market losses. What is 1.5 trillion? Going back, if you take 2.2 trillion and you write off 1.5 trillion, you don't get much left. Now, is it ever going to be recognized? I mean, whatever is not recognized is not a problem until it's a problem. All right? So there is obviously a hidden problem. They're going to have to find a way around it. And ultimately, there is going to be a need to get help from someone else. And in this time, if it happens, I don't know who's going to come and help. Another interesting fact, which a lot of people don't pay attention to, is the Social Security fund. But actually, a lot of other funds, trust funds and all that there's around. But this Social Security in Singapore is similar to your Central Provident Fund. It's the fund which is going to pay you when you retire and so forth. Yeah. So this comes from the Board of Trustees of the Social Security Fund in the US. And based on their projections, by 2036, they will have zero balance in their median forecast. I mean, the optimistic forecast, forget it, not going to happen. Yeah, I looked at the assumptions. Their recommendation, their own recommendation, they have to increase their revenue, so increase the payroll tax. They have to reduce the benefits by about 25%, 21 to 25%, depending on who you want to reduce it for, or a combination of this. Now ask this question. Election year, are they going to do it? Kidding. No candidate will ever even consider and talk about this. All right. So this is going to be pushed to next year, but it is a big issue. The moment you talk about this, you are going to get riots. France tried to do this because they have their own problems, right? Delaying the retirement age, and they had massive riots. Massive riots. So I'm going to end that. I just feel that there's a lot of problems in the US, a lot of problems signaled by 2024, something happening in the West. I hope it is not war, although it is a possibility that there could be war. Now, why is it possible that there could be war? Okay, let me caveat. I hope it doesn't happen. But in the case of a war, if you look at World War II, what happened? The winners got to dictate terms to the losers. In that case, in World War II, Germany was forced to pay reparations. Assets were confiscated and so forth. So in the case of a war, a global war, if the US, if there's a war, global war, if the US wins, then what happens? The US gets to dictate terms. It gets to tell you, all the people who the US owes money to, hey, guess what? You caused this damage, you caused that damage, you're going to pay it off. You're going to wipe, we're going to wipe the slate clean. Guess what? All the treasury, all the US treasuries that you owned is now my money. Okay. So that's what can happen. I don't wish it, but that is a small possibility that it could happen in our lifetime. Okay, so be aware of that risk. Now, in summary, okay, Bitcoin is special. If you look at its chart, the coincidences, it's just very odd. It kind of feels like the inventor, Satoshi Nakamoto, is not of this world. Somehow he found a timing which just fit the explanation of what Bitcoin is as an entity perfectly. Okay, a mineral mountain that's mining something valuable, and then in 2024 everything becomes clear. The year itself holds great uncertainties. You have a double heaven-earth clash in the Bazi. You have the West, which I think is the main concern. The key question that remains for me is whether Bitcoin can weather the storm of 2024. Because the whole point of Bitcoin is that it was designed to weather the insane inflation of fiat currencies, money printing, and so forth. So if something really bad happens, a credit event, another few entities in the US fails, massive recession hits, the Federal Reserve probably has no choice but to come in and help. When that happens, there will be massive inflation of the monetary base, and that is precisely what Bitcoin or that is one of the things that Bitcoin was designed to actually help, those people who don't want to get debased, to own. So will this be the year that happens, and will Bitcoin actually be able to weather that? That is the question that I'm not sure about. Okay. My personal view, my stance, therefore, do your own research. This is just what I'm doing. I'm hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. I'm staying optimistic until I see signs of the bubble bursting. The vigilance will be increased from June 2024, where I see problems. The breakdown patterns in key charts for the key risk asset leaders, for example, I would look at NVIDIA, for example. If you're looking at stocks, you must make sure that the chart continues to remain strong, and it perplexes a lot of people, but if people remain risk-loving and all that, that chart will hold. The moment that breaks down, that's probably the time to get concerned. Meanwhile, I hold energy, precious metals, and the sounder cryptos. A lot of people are playing meme stocks and all that at the moment. I don't want to spend that kind of time to actually run in and out of those things. So, and I'm massively concerned because of my 2024 low. So I'm going to end here and open up the chat to questions. Feel free to unmute or type in your questions in the chat. Happy to receive comments if you're still there. Are you guys still there? Okay, good. I see some people. Based on astrology, China is recovering. Yes, I would. China is basically, if you look at just purely from a valuation perspective, the market is valued as dead. So there are a lot of companies there which are actually very, very undervalued once you assume that things have normalized. So look at those. And of course, if you have ability to look at charts, technical trading and all that, look for the appropriate basing chart patterns before you actually time your entry. I would. Any other questions? Yes, gold has actually broken into a new high. So normally, like whether you like an asset or you don't like an asset, when it breaks through an all-time high, it tends to have the momentum to go even higher. So yes, I would say gold, based on technicals and based on fundamentals. Remember this year? Yeah. Wood dragon year. Earth strong. Metal is supported. Can US mandate all non-bank operations, pension funds, insurance, and crypto like Tether to hold US treasuries to fill this gap? Okay, you're asking question from a domestic point of view. Yes, my answer is the US government can do pretty much anything, in terms of mandates internally. But here's the problem. All the riches, the wealth, if you look at aggregate deposits, cash and all that, if you look at total deposits over total debt, the US in aggregate doesn't have a problem. But when you look under the hood, you realize that all the assets, or 80% of the assets, owned by 20% of the people, something like that. Okay. So the richest people hold most of the assets. So you can mandate all you want. If there are a couple of banks that start looking like they're gonna fail, what do you think all these rich people are gonna do? That's probably what happened in the global financial crisis. When the richest people lose faith, they leave. So you can mandate all you want on the companies. The people who are very, very, very rich and very, very well connected, they will find a way to escape the loopholes and get the hell out. And that's what happened what happens when you look at the global balance sheets and you look at the NIIP I showed you. That's why it actually went deficit and worse and worse and worse and worse. The exodus hasn't stopped. Someone has 4 kilograms of gold. You don't need my advice. But yeah, I would say gold should actually go higher. Can the outlook for Bitcoin be used for other cryptos like ETH? I suspect so, but I haven't looked. I suspect so. No. Maybe other people who are enthusiastic, who are also very good at metaphysics, but can actually lend a hand and actually look, yeah, at Ethereum and so forth. Singapore 2025 and beyond, oh my goodness. I've given talks before, ever since Lee Kuan Yew died. And essentially, we are going through a really, really tough time. So if you go back to what I said then, Singapore is not exactly in the best place right now. Trying period. Any other questions? Okay, guys. China and Hong Kong, does the tail dog wag the tail? Not quite sure. Not quite sure because Hong Kong is particularly sensitive to interest rates. When you say Hong Kong good or Hong Kong bad, if you're talking about Hong Kong stocks, I would say probably good if the US is in trouble and goes from massive liquidity, the Feds actually go crazy, injecting liquidity, then suddenly you'll see a lot of money flows, which has a direct impact on the liquidity within Hong Kong because of the fixed peg. Yeah, liquidity will automatically be pushed into financial assets in Hong Kong.